Good day and welcome to Predators Proclivity, the podcast where we look at data from the season for the NHL Nashville Predators and make comments upon it. I'm your host, Preston Proctor. So today, the Preds, of course, the Preds are out of the playoffs a couple weeks, but I previewed or warned or threatened, depending on how you look at it, to look into what I think is award bias at least against most of the Western Conference, and maybe more than just the Western Conference from the initial look at the data I've had. But anyway, so in order to do that analysis, what I did is I went back and I looked at the history of the NHL. And I did that from three standpoints. One, when did the teams come into being? Because it's not fair to say there's award bias if I look at a time period where there were only the six teams, the original six. Then no way that the other teams could compete against that since they weren't competing at that time. So I wanted to take a look and come up with a reasonable time frame with which to do the analysis. And so in order to do that, I kind of went through the history of the NHL, which I found to be fairly interesting. It was a little hard to generate. I guess I'll throw out a shout to Wikipedia. Hopefully that data is right, because the NHL sure doesn't want to talk a lot about it on their website. There are books and stuff like that, but I'm not looking to do some really in-depth analysis and write my own book, even though my wife recommends that I take all this document I'm looking at, which is a condensation of what I did. It's 12 pages long. So I wanted to look at, when did the teams come around, and then what trophies were available? Because if there are no trophies, how can there be an award bias, right? Or awards anyway? How can there be award bias? So I went through and started researching the trophies, which was really kind of interesting. Especially from the standpoint of like the Prince of Wales trophy, which I'll get into, and as I'm going to go through things on a timeline basis and talk about things that happened in the NHL, and then if things happen with trophies, then mention that, kind of give you a little bit of background on the trophy, which was some of them were quite interesting. The Lady Byng trophy had a really interesting story to introduce it to the league, and then, as I was saying, the Prince of Wales trophy kind of evolves as the NHL league did. So when I was going through this document and I was trying to update the timeline for the Prince of Wales document, I wound up having to update a lot of other things. One of the other issue that I looked at that's not really relevant to the discussion, but I thought was kind of interesting because I know this has changed over time, was that the conferences and divisions and how they were set up and came and went. Apparently, they had them and they got rid of them, and then how all that evolved, which I thought was also kind of interesting. And as all that changed, those changes happened in the NHL. The Prince of Wales trophy changed, diminishing in status every step of the way, kind of almost, in some ways. But it really kind of interesting how all that happened. So hopefully I can condense these 12 pages of data to you in a format that will be interesting. I am starting to fight off something, cold or something. Got back from our trip, and my wife is now sick, so it's coming for me, which is why I thought, well, I'd come down here this Saturday morning and try to get the podcast out of the way because I may not be able to talk later. Excuse me. There you go. Right on cue. Thank you, Cough. So let's get into this. Hopefully this all makes sense. I think I covered my bases, having go through it like 3 different times. I think I double-checked my information, and hopefully I got it all updated here in front of me. And like I said, hopefully it's interesting to you as well. So, okay, so let's start a little bit by breaking down the NHL eras, and so where it kind of all starts is in 1893 is where I'm starting anyway. There was hockey before 1893, but 1893 is when the Stanley Cup appears on the scene. And so 1893 to 1916 is that era. Now they call... Now, the next era is 1917 to 1941. That's considered to be the founding era because that's when the National Hockey League actually came into being. So before 1917, there was no NHL. There was hockey, but there was no NHL. The era is not really named, so I call it hockey magma. I was trying to think of like this primordial mist. And the more I started looking into that, I thought, well, this is really kind of getting gross. So let's stick with magma. Then there's two eras inside of that for me, 1893 to 1907, which I call amateur hour because because there was no professional hockey at the time. Then 1908 to 1916, professional forming. And then then you get to the founding era, 1917 to 1941. Then the original 6 era, 1942 to 1967. Yeah, 25 years. There was only the 6 teams. And kind of interesting how they did playoffs and decided some things was kind of interesting. And then 1967 and 1992 is considered the expansion era. That's when the LA Kings came into being. The league doubled then. And then 1993 to present is considered the modern era. There were a lot of rule changes and things that happened along the way. I did not, and you will not get a lot of that. You'll get a couple of things that I thought was interesting, questions that I wanted to have answered myself. And so I'll mention a few of those, but I don't go into a lot of rule changing. I did notice there was a time where forward passing was suddenly allowed past the blue line, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm not getting into this. This document. I need to get through this so I can do my analysis. All the different rule changes over the years, I do think is fascinating and why they came about, but you won't get that from me. Okay. So, 1983 to 1925 hockey magma, and the subplot being amateur hour, because in 1893, Lord Stanley gave this cup to he gave the cup. Not exactly sure who he gave it to, but the Stanley Cup trustees were created at the time in order to manage the cup. Okay, so the Stanley Cup trustees, they have the Stanley Cup. Lord Stanley at the time was Governor General of Canada. And not long after he had this cup created and gave it to the hockey people in Canada, he had to return to England to be the Earl of Derby. And I think his father passed away, and he needed to go back and fulfill his duties. And so he went back to England to be the Earl of Derby. He donated the cup, never saw it awarded. Now, at the time, the Stanley Cup was considered to be given to the Championship Hockey Club of the Dominion of Canada. The Championship Hockey Club of the Dominion of Canada, which would be considered the top amateur hockey team in Canada. Now, at the time, also, whoever had the cup whoever didn't have the cup could challenge the team at any time and say, hey, I want to play you for the cup. And then they would come up with a date and they would play. It could be in the middle of the season. It could be in the off season. It could be anytime, whenever. And then whoever won got the Stanley Cup. So it could change hands several times during the course of a year. Not what we're used to seeing right now, obviously, but interestingly enough, it was just something to play for. And so that came about in 1893. So now we move ahead to 1906. 1906, professional teams are being created. Players are being paid to play. And so the Stanley Cup trustees, some of these teams were pretty good, and so they decided that professional teams can compete for the Stanley Cup, and that's 1906. So here we go. So now we get to 1908, and so the time period, the amateur hour goes through 1907, and now we're professional forming in 1908. So we've got some professional teams, and now we have a professional league. The Ontario Professional Hockey League was created in 1907. So 1907. And competed for but never won the cup. It was disbanded in 1911. Many teams became part of the National Hockey Association, which was another league, National Hockey Association, not league, NHA. And then at the time, Eastern Canada Amateur Hockey Association, who had the cup at the time, one of the teams had the cup at the time, they dropped amateur. So they became a professional hockey team as well. Eastern Canada Amateur Hockey Association became a professional league. Then you've got the Ontario Professional Hockey League, and you've got the National Hockey Association. So we have all of those. Now, in 1908, we also get a couple more cups. Or we get another cup, the Allen Cup. The Allen Cup is now given by the Allen Cup trustees to Canadian amateur teams, which is what the Stanley Cup had originally been set up for. And so therefore, the Stanley Cup is now a professional hockey only trophy. However, the way it's still competed for is the same. You can challenge at any time. You're off playing your hockey season and somebody goes, hey, we need to play. We want that cup. And so challenges can happen at any time, again, managed still by the Stanley Cup trustees. Now, the Allen Cup, Sir Montague Allen of the Allen Steamship Line. He's a hockey enthusiast. A lot of the cups that we get in this are by people that were somehow associated with the NHL one way or another, or multiple ways in a couple of instances. But this guy, Allen, is just an enthusiast. Now, interesting that cup is still around today. Well, so is the Stanley Cup. So I guess it's not that interesting, but it's still awarded to the Canadian men's amateur ice hockey champion. So that's the Allen Cup, introduced in 1908, which made the Stanley Cup, took the Stanley Cup from being primarily an amateur with some professional interaction. The Stanley Cup is now professional teams. Okay, so I kind of my 1908 notes kind of skipped forward. 1910 is when the National Hockey Association was formed, out of the remnants of the Ontario Professional Hockey League. So I jumped ahead a little bit there. My notes tried to be informative and wound up being slightly confusing. So anyway, so 1910, the National Hockey Association, NHA, is formed, and we get the O'Brien Trophy or O'Brien Cup. I don't know why they couldn't decide on whether to call it trophy or cup, so I have trophy and cup in parentheses. I don't know what to call it. But anyway, we don't need to worry about that because in 1950 it goes away. But here we are in 1910, and the NHA champion gets the O'Brien Cup. Now, who is O'Brien? O'Brien is a Canadian senator, M.J. O'Brien, and he donated this in honor of his son, Ambrose. Ambrose was a founder of the NHA, one of the founders of the NHA, and he was the founding owner of the Montreal Canadiens. I thought maybe the guy had died or something, but no, I guess he's just very proud of his son. Now, they were silver. I guess one of the things that the O'Briens owned was silver mines, and the cup is made from silver from an O'Brien silver mine. All righty then. So here we go. Now, one of the things I've always been interested in is how did we get to the place where we've got 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, and a goaltender? And why is that the state? I mean, you think it'd be 3 and 3, right? Well, at this point in time, there actually are 6 skaters and a goaltender. So they have still 3 forwards and 2 defensemen, but there's a rover. There's a rover position in hockey. So there's 6 skaters, and the rover, they said, could play anywhere. Didn't have a specific place on the ice, and everything else is the same as today. Well, the reason that's interesting is because in 1912, the NHL dropped the rover position. So that's when we came up with the 5 skaters and a goaltender configuration that we are used to seeing today. But before 1912, and even at 1912, the other leagues didn't necessarily go along with this. The NHL, NHA, from some of the readings, may not have been terribly popular among other leagues, but they kept it up, and they kept up the rover, and I don't know for how long. I don't care. It's not what I was looking into. I do care, but it's not. There was way more research than I needed to do. But that was one of the things. The number of players on the ice has always fascinated me. I've tried to slip that into questions for Jim Fox or the Kings announcers, and it's never made it there. At least when they answered it, I wasn't listening if they ever did answer it. But anyway, that's how we got today. So 1912 is also when the Stanley Cup trustees decided that all of these challenges during the season is disruptive, and what they now only accept are challenges after the end of the champion's regular season. So whoever has the cup after their regular season is over, you can challenge them. So that started in 1912. And then now, then we come to 1914, which is near the end of the hockey magma, and we get the first challenge from the Pacific Coast Hockey Association. The PCHA, the Pacific Coast Hockey Association, existed from 1911 to 1924. 1914 was the first time that they challenged for the cup, and the PCHA was primarily Canadian, but they added 2 teams, the Portland Rosebuds and the Seattle Metropolitans. So Portland Rosebuds and Seattle Metropolitans, part of the Pacific Coast Hockey Association. I'm not exactly sure what year they came in. Again, that's at some point I just have to say I've got enough information. Let's just keep moving on. But anyhow, so 1917 and the founding era, 1917 and 1941, the founding era of the NHL. The Seattle Metropolitans won the Stanley Cup, 1917, and this caused forced removal of the mandate that the cup is given to the top hockey club in Canada. I guess when you give your cup to a team in another country, you can no longer say that it's the top, that goes to the top team in your country. So the Seattle Metropolitans won the Stanley Cup in 1917. There you go. Now again, it's still a challenge cup. at this point in time. It's not the given to the winner of the NHL because, hey, guess what? The NHL is just now forming. 1917, the NHL formed from the NHA, National Hockey Association, and primarily because there was one owner in the NHA that nobody liked, and he was not allowed to join the NHL. They're like, well, we don't like you. We can't get you out. We're just going to create our own league. So there you go. So the NHL is now formed in 1917 with teams from the NHL, except I think it was Toronto, the Toronto Maple Leafs. I didn't make that note, but so there you go. But okay, so with forming the NHL, okay, so I got a note here. No divisions or conferences yet. And now we've got the O'Brien Trophy, which was for the NHA champion. So there's no NHA. The last team that won it was the Montreal Canadiens, so they just kept it. They kept it, the O'Brien Trophy, and it wasn't awarded again, I think, till 21 or something like that, 1921. So as far as I can tell, there's no trophy for the winner of the NHL at this point. All right, and now we get to 1921. The Western Canada Hockey League is formed, and the O'Brien Trophy is now has been acquired by the NHL from the Montreal Canadiens, who were in the NHL. But they've acquired it from the old NHA, and now it is the NHL Playoff Champion Cup or trophy. Remember, the Stanley Cup is still a Challenge Cup. When you go back and you look at Stanley Cup winners, they simplify it by saying that all of these people won the Stanley Cup. But that's not entirely accurate to say that the NHL winners all won the Stanley Cup, because they didn't. They could have, and then it could have been taken away from them because it's a Challenge Cup at this point in time. Okay. So in 1924, the Western Canada Hockey League and the Pacific Coast Hockey League merge, forming the Western Hockey League. The Seattle Metropolitans team folded, and so those two leagues merged together in 1924. The other thing is that the NHL now has a U.S. team, the first U.S. team to join the NHL, the Boston Bruins. So Boston Bruins, 1924, the first non-Canadian team in the NHL. And we have a new trophy, the Hart Memorial Trophy, which is given to the player determined most valuable to their team. This is awarded by the Professional Hockey Writers Association. At least that's how it's done today. I did not look into how it was done in the past. I don't know if there was a Professional Hockey Writers Association in 1924, but it's how it is given today. Hart Memorial Trophy in memorial of Cecil Hart, who is the manager coach of the Montreal Canadiens. And so now we're starting to really get into the swing of things where all of the cups awards are named after people associated with the NHL, except the next two. 1925. Oh, 1925. Okay. There's a couple of interesting things that went on here in 1925. A number of interesting things that happened here in 1925. So the NHL playoffs. At this point in time, the top three teams would play in the playoffs. The second and third seed teams would play each other in a 2-game series. And if they're, they split the games, then the winner would be decided by who scored more goals. Okay, so and then they would go on to play the number 1 seed. Well, this year, the Montreal Canadiens were the 3rd seed. The 2nd seed was the Toronto St. Patricks. The Toronto St. Patricks were the 2 seed. And Hamilton Tigers were the number 1 seed. So Montreal played Toronto. They split the games, and Montreal scored more goals, so they won that series. So they would go on to play the number 1 seed, except the Hamilton Tigers were on strike. Really bad time to go on strike, I would say, during the playoffs. 2 games to go, man. What's the deal? But anyway, they were on strike. So there was no game. Montreal, by default, won the NHL playoffs because they didn't have to play the number 1 seed. So the Montreal Canadiens won the NHL championship, 1925, by not having to play the number 1 team who was on strike. Now, they did get a challenge from the Victoria Cougars from the WHL and the Western Hockey League, and they lost the Challenge Cup 3-1. I didn't look into the format. They played 4 games. I assume it'd be the same if they split the games. It would be goals scored. Victoria did score twice as many goals, but it didn't matter. They scored 3. They won 3 games to Montreal's 1. So the Canadiens won the NHL playoffs by not having to play the team that was on strike, and then lost the Stanley Cup to the WHL, Victoria Cougars. Okay. Now, which a lot of investigation into that, because we are now getting the Prince of Wales trophy. The Prince of Wales trophy was a trophy that was given to the winner of the NHL playoff champions, the NHL playoff champions. But before that, there was the first game in Madison Square Garden held on December 15th, 1925, between the Montreal Canadiens and the New York Americans, and the cup was given to the winner, the Montreal Canadiens, because they won that game. So they won that game. The Canadiens held on to the cup till the end of the season, then they won the NHL playoffs. So they're on it for having won the game in 1925 at Madison Square Gardens. Their names are on the cup because they won the NHL playoffs. But that's not enough. They went back, and since the Montreal Canadiens won the NHL in the previous year, 1924, the people that were on that team, their names are engraved on it too. So the award is given out once, and the Montreal Canadiens get to have their name on it 3 times. That really took a lot of digging to make sense of that. I think that makes sense. The other award that came out is the Lady Byng Memorial Trophy. The Lady Byng Memorial Trophy is given to someone whose sportsmanship and gentlemanly conduct with high standard of playing ability. And currently it's decided by the Professional Hockey Writers Association. The Lady Byng was Canada's Governor General's wife. That's who Lady Byng was. And she came up with this trophy, and I guess came up with the criteria under which she wanted to give it out. I don't know why. I stopped doing research at some point, like I said. But the thing is, she knew who she wanted to award it to, and called the guy over to her house and was showing him this trophy and talking to him about, you think the NHL would, you think the NHL would want this award? Maybe we could give the award for this, that, and the other. What do you think? And the guy was like, oh, yeah, the NHL would love to have this award. Think that's great. And she goes, well, congratulations, it's yours. And so as I thought that was a really funny story. So she awarded it personally to the guy that she wanted to give it to, and off they went. Very, very cute story. So that's the Lady Byng Memorial Trophy. Lady Byng, Canada's Governor General's wife at the time, 1925 still. And now we've got the Prince of Wales Trophy, which I already talked through. The Prince of Wales was sponsored by Prince Edward, the Prince of Wales. Became King Edward VIII, but at the time he was the Prince of Wales. It was initially awarded to that winner of the Madison Square Garden game, and then given to the NHL playoff champions. Why he wanted to give this award, I don't know. But anyway, so it was given by Prince Edward, who was the Prince of Wales, who later became King Edward VIII. All right, we're up to 1926. At this point in time, the NHL is the only remaining major hockey league, and thereby the sole competitor for the Stanley Cup. There were some leagues that did make challenges, but the Stanley Cup trustees decided they were not worthy. At this time, the NHL did consist of 10 teams. 1926, there were 10 teams. Interesting, here's where the first time the NHL introduces having divisions. There's an American and a Canadian division. Although in the Canadian division, there's an American team. The New York Americans are in the Canadian division. So go figure. The American division is made up of the Boston Bruins, the Chicago Blackhawks. At this point in time, the Blackhawks, that's two words, Black and Hawks. I didn't get into this at some point in time. They merged it, Blackhawks being one word, but at this point in time, it's still two. Then there's the Detroit Cougars, the New York Rangers, and the Pittsburgh Pirates, not the baseball team. The Pittsburgh Pirates being a hockey team in the American division of the National Hockey League. And we have the Canadian division with the Montreal Canadiens, the Montreal Maroons, which, if I remember correctly, I didn't write this down, didn't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I guess Montreal having a significant population of French and English speakers. I think this is right. Or was that? I think this is right. The Canadians were popular amongst the French-speaking citizens, but not the English-speaking ones. So they created a team for the English-speaking citizens of Montreal. So that's why you've got two teams in Montreal, the Canadiens and the Maroons. Okay, also in this division of the Canadian division are the New York Americans, the Ottawa Senators, and the Toronto St. Patricks. 1926 was also the last season that the NHL accepted challenges from other leagues. So 1926 was the last chance you got. And then also in 1926, we see the introduction of what should be in Jonathan Quick's cabinet, the Vezina Trophy, given to the best goaltender. At this time, it's determined by the fewest goals allowed in the season. So the NHL, it's basically a statistics award, fewest goals allowed. Vezina was Canadians goaltender Georges Vezina, who collapsed during a game in 1925 and died of tuberculosis a few months later. So that's it's not called the Vezina Memorial Trophy, but it's in memorial of Georges Vezina, Canadians goaltender. And so that's 1926. 1928, we get, oh, right, yeah. Okay, so 19, okay, back 1925, so the NHL playoff champions get the Prince of Wales trophy. If we remember, back starting in 1921, the O'Brien Trophy was given to the NHL playoff champion. So yes, here in 1925 and 1926, they get two trophies. They get both the O'Brien Trophy and the Prince of Wales Trophy for winning the NHL playoffs. Two trophies. I guess it's a good deal. So and now we get to the 1928, so 1927, 1928 season. Yeah, that was something I meant to explain a little bit too, leading into this, is that the years get a little funky, telling you what year things started, because since the season starts in one year and ends in another, and so decisions typically happen in the summer. So say the summer of 1932, and then it gets awarded, like the Calder Trophy coming up here in 1933, created in 1932, awarded in 1933 because it's the 1932-1933 season. So it gets if you're hearing my excuse me, my years for some of this stuff, and you think I might be a year off one way or another, it's because I couldn't decide how to best do that, but I tried anyway. So we get to 1928, and we've got the American and Canadian divisions that were created in 1926 for the 1926-1927 season, and then starting in 1928, the O'Brien Trophy is now given to the Canadian Division regular season champion, and the Prince of Wales Trophy is given to the American Division regular season champion. So again, the Stanley Cup isn't quite owned by the NHL yet, but they're the only ones that can win it. So these the two trophies for this, that was 1926. They create the two new divisions, and now the trophies that were going to the playoff champion are going to the regular season champions for the two divisions. 1928. Now we get to 1931. The team that was the Pittsburgh Pirates from 1925 to 1930 became the Philadelphia Quakers in 1930, and then disbanded in 1931. We get to 1933, and we get the Calder Memorial Trophy. And this award is given by the Professional Hockey Writers Association now. And the reason why that is interesting is because when I start looking at bias, I'm saying, okay, is it the league? Is it writers? Who actually has the bias, right? So anyhow, but this is basically a rookie trophy, the most proficient in the first year in the NHL. And Frank Calder, so this is 1933. Frank Calder was the NHL president from 1917 to 1943 when he died. So this trophy was named after him. I guess he personally gave it out. But he was the NHL president at the time this trophy was. I'm sure it wasn't Calder Memorial Trophy at the time. The names of some of these things changed to protect the innocent, I suppose. But this is 1933. In 1935, the St. Louis Eagles disbanded. Haven't heard of them because they were the Ottawa Senators that moved to St. Louis. This was the first instance, I believe, that the NHL bought a team and managed them. The St. Louis Eagles, since they were the Ottawa Senators, they stayed in the Canadian divisions. 1935, the Montreal Maroons folded, and so we get to 1938, and the NHL gets rid of the divisions. So there are no more American or Canadian divisions here in 1938. There are only 7 teams left. So since there's, now we're back to the O'Brien and the Prince of Wales trophy. Since there are no divisions, what happens to those trophies? So the O'Brien trophy is given unto the playoff runner-up. Hey, you lost the Stanley Cup, but here's the O'Brien trophy. Good for you. And since there's no American division champion, the Prince of Wales trophy was not given out. Is that right? That doesn't seem right. So what are we up to? 1938, the Prince of Wales trophy. 1938, the regular season champion. Okay. No American division, comma, given to the regular season division. I've got my backup document here. So if I have to struggle for a minute, it's because I need to look to see what yes, the backup document's longer. Actually, it's not, because it doesn't have, never mind. So the O'Brien trophy is given to the playoff runner-up, and the Prince of Wales trophy is given to the regular season champion. Again, there's no divisions. And then we get to 1941, and the New York Americans folded. So there's only 6 teams left, which is how we get to the original 6 era, 1942 to 1967. No divisions. The teams that are remaining: the Boston Bruins, Chicago Blackhawks, Detroit Red Wings, Montreal Canadiens, New York Rangers, and Toronto Maple Leafs. That's our original 6 teams, 1942. 1947, the NHL completes a deal with the Stanley Cup trustees to gain complete control of the Stanley Cup. So 1947 is when the NHL finally gets to own the Stanley Cup. 1947, the first All-Star game in the NHL. And so with the NHL acquiring the Stanley Cup, the playoff champion, starting with the 1947-48 season, the NHL playoff champion is the only team that will win it. So there's no more challenges. Challenges are over for the Stanley Cup. The playoff champion wins it starting 1947. And we get the Art Ross Trophy. The player with the most regular season points in the 47-48 season will get the Art Ross Trophy. Art Ross was a Boston Bruins coach, general manager. He was also a Hall of Fame player for the NHL. So that's Art Ross, the Art Ross Trophy. And this is another one of those things where the scoring leaders are tracked since 1918, but the trophy didn't come into existence until 1947. So if you look at the history of the Art Ross Trophy, it will go back to 1918, but it was not awarded until 1948, until the end of the 47-48 season. All right, now 1950, we get the O'Brien Trophy is finally retired. I don't think anybody liked getting a trophy for losing the Stanley Cup playoffs. But they got something. And 1952, the Canadian Broadcasting Company starts televising games. Big controversy. They thought that if you're showing the games on TV, nobody will want to come to the game. Where have we heard that before? But it was started, and was very successful. Hey, I think they still do it. 1954, we get another trophy. James Norris, the James Norris Memorial Trophy. James Norris was the owner-president of the Detroit Red Wings from 1932 to 1952. It is given to the greatest all-around defense player by the Professional Hockey Writers Association. So the Norris Trophy, James Norris Memorial Trophy, 1954. And now 1956, hockey is now broadcast into the U.S., which was apparently extremely successful. And I think they still do it today. One thing that I didn't note, 1959, Jacques Plante, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, the first goaltender to regularly wear a face mask. I don't know what they were thinking. Thinking, I got bones. What do I need a mask for? But 1959, the first goaltender to regularly wear a face mask. 1965, we get another trophy, Conn Smythe Trophy. Conn Smythe, yes, coach, manager, president, owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we're getting lots of awards for people who owned, ran, managed hockey teams. So whatever, sure they were amazing people. The MVP playoffs. The MVP of the playoffs determined by the Professional Hockey Writers Association. The MVP of the playoffs, the Conn Smythe Trophy, not always given to the team that wins. I think if I remember correctly, like 4 or 5 or 6 times it was given to somebody on the other team, the losing team. But hey, there you go. Conn Smythe Trophy, 1965, which takes us to the expansion era. 1967 to 1992 considered to be the expansion era for the NHL. You got tired of playing with just 6 teams. Some years they would have 4 teams be in the playoffs, and some years they would have 3. I don't know. I didn't get it. And the weird thing was it seemed consistent when they had 4. The 1 seed would play the 3 seed, and the 2 seed would play the 4 seed, and I don't have a clue why. But I looked at 2 seasons, and it was the same both times. So I thought, okay. I tried to look up something that would tell me how they determined to do the playoffs. I couldn't find it, and I decided I'd done enough research on something that I wasn't going to do research on yet again. And but I do remember that, so now I'm calling it out. But so here, 1967, they're like, hey, these 6 teams are great, but, let's see what we can do with this. All right, so 1967, the NHL expand to 12, so they double, adding the Los Angeles Kings, the Minnesota North Stars, the Philadelphia Flyers, Pittsburgh Penguins, Oakland Seals. Aha, wasn't expecting that one, were you? Oakland Seals and the St. Louis Blues. We also now have divisions. We have East and West divisions. The East Division are the original 6, Boston, Chicago, Detroit, Montreal, New York Rangers, and Toronto. And the West are the expansion teams. So we've got divisions again. Da-da-da-da. The Prince of Wales Trophy. Here, now it's given to the East Division regular season champion. As I said, the Prince of Wales Trophy, kind of every time the NHL kind of changed what they were doing, the Prince of Wales Trophy changed what it was doing. Well, I guess not what it was doing, but what people were doing with it. So, the Prince of Wales Trophy, East Division regular season champion. And we've got 2 new trophies. Well, of course, the West Division has to have a regular season champion award, and that is now the Clarence S. Campbell Bowl. Not a trophy, not an award. It's a bowl. He was president of the NHL from the 1946-47 season to the 76-77 season. So for 31 years, Clarence Campbell. So he's still president of NHL at the time that this bowl, and with his name on it, is handed out to West Division regular season champion. May not have been called the Campbell Bowl at the time, but it's called the Campbell Bowl now. And we also get the Bill Masterson Memorial Trophy, the player with perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to hockey. That one's given out by the Professional Hockey Writers Association. Bill Masterson was a player for the Minnesota North Stars who died in January 1968 from an injury sustained in a game. I believe he was the first, might be the only player who died from injuries sustained during a game. Bill Masterson. So we have the Bill Masterson Memorial Trophy, 1967. He died in 1968, so I'm assuming that they had the trophy and they renamed it. But you're not going to have a memorial trophy in 1967 if he dies in 1968. But I don't know how all that worked out. But there you go. That's what the trophy is. So 1967. So now we get to 1970, and the NHL expands again. 2 more teams, the Buffalo Sabres and the Vancouver Canucks. Now, both of these teams, Buffalo and Vancouver, were added to the East Division, and Chicago moved to the West because, of course, Vancouver being in the West would make no sense at all. And we no longer have the Oakland Seals. They are now the California Golden Seals. The background on that team was kind of interesting. I guess I think they played in Oakland. They wanted to move them out of the San Francisco area, but then they couldn't, and a whole nother set of reading. The thing that kind of gets interesting about this is that some of these teams, like the Montreal Maroons, did win the Stanley Cup at one point in time. They were Stanley Cup owners, but that doesn't account. So, and it was before the time period that I'm considering. So, fortunately, that kind of goes out the window. But sometimes these teams change names, which makes it hard to figure out where to apply that particular award to. And I'll get into more of that later because it's looking at websites about who owns the records for some of these teams, and you would think that. I'm going to call out, we haven't got to them yet, but like the Phoenix Coyotes, the Phoenix Coyotes became the Arizona Coyotes, and apparently the Arizona Coyotes do not claim any of the success awards of the Phoenix Coyotes. So what do you do with that? I don't know. Well, we know also, remember at this point in time, Phoenix, the Coyotes of the franchise, how is this working out? They're moving to Utah. But the name isn't. They're going to keep the name because the guy that owns Arizona is going to build a big stadium and potentially get another franchise. But, who owns the records? I have a hard time trying to figure that one out. So I kind of give up. If they don't want to claim, if the team doesn't want to claim them, I'm not going to give them to them. But anyway, so Oakland Seals are now California Golden Seals. We're in 1970. We've got 14 teams in the NHL. And now we come to 1971 and we get another award, the Lester B. Pearson Award. It changes names later. We'll get to that later. It's given to the most outstanding player by the Players Association. I like that. But the Lester B. Pearson Award. Lester B. Pearson was the Canadian Prime Minister from 1963 to 1968. Known for winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1957 for helping to negotiate the end of the Suez Crisis. Also called the Sinai War or the Second Arab-Israeli War. That's Lester B. Pearson. The Lester B. Pearson Award, 1971, Most Outstanding Player as decided by the National Hockey League Players Association. You'd think they would know. All right. 1972, the NHL not being popular with some of its players. Gordie Howe, I think, notably, and others, they create their own league, the World Hockey Association. And at some point in time, they had 16 teams. So you've got the NHL, and now you've got the World Hockey Association, 1972. So the NHL decided to expand to 16 teams from 14. They get the Atlanta Flames in the West Division, the Atlanta Flames, and the New York Islanders in the East. So here we are, the New York Islanders. And then in 1974, the NHL added 2 more teams, the Kansas City Scouts and the Washington Capitals. So this is where they decided that what they've been doing with the divisions is no longer working. And so 1974, instead of having 2 divisions, they create 2 conferences, and the conferences have 2 divisions each. So, okay, here we are, the Prince of Wales. So the Prince of Wales trophy changes the definition again. The 2 conferences are the Prince of Wales and Campbell. Remember, the Prince of Wales trophy and the Campbell Bowl were given to the winners of the East and West divisions. So now the bowls are owned by the conferences. The Prince of Wales trophy goes to the Prince of Wales Conference regular season champion, the Clarence S. Campbell Bowl, goes to the Campbell Conference regular season champion. We also get the Jack Adams Award. That's a new award. It's given by the NHL Broadcasters Association to the coach who contributed most to team success, Jack Adams. So this is 1974. Jack Adams was the Detroit general manager from 1927 to 1962. Interesting. First coach, maybe not the last coach, suspended during the Stanley Cup Finals. During the Stanley Cup Finals, he got suspended from a game for punching a ref. Probably a lot of coaches wish they could do that. But he got suspended during the Stanley Cup Finals for punching a ref. I assume because he didn't like the call. And he was that people loved that so much they gave an award in his name to the coach who contributes most to team success. Okay. You lead with the right cross. So we've got 2 conferences. Let's go. Sorry, struggling a little bit here. We have 2 conferences. And each, we got 2 conferences and we have 2 divisions in each. Okay, so one of the things I was always interested in, the divisions are Adams, Norris, Patrick, and Smythe. Adams, Norris, Patrick, and Smythe. So in Prince of Wales, you've got Adams and Norris. In Campbell, you've got Patrick and Smythe. Adams, named after Charles Francis Adams, the founder of the Boston Bruins. Norris, from James E. Norris, the longtime owner of the Detroit Red Wings. Remember, we have the Norris Award. Patrick, Lester Patrick, player and longtime coach of the New York Rangers. And Smythe, Conn Smythe. We've already talked about that award, and longtime owner, general manager, and head coach in the league. So that's how the 4 divisions got named. So in the Adams division of the Prince of Wales Conference, we have Boston, Buffalo, California, and Toronto. Boston, Buffalo, California, and Toronto. Which one of these is different from the others? In the Norris, we've got Detroit, Montreal, LA, Pittsburgh, and Washington. Again, one of these is different from the others. Detroit, Montreal, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, Washington. Washington, D.C., not Washington State. All right, in the Patrick division of the Campbell Conference, we have Atlanta, the New York Islanders, the New York Rangers, and Philadelphia. And forever and ever, always, the Islanders and the Rangers will be in the same division. I guess makes sense. They both play in New York City. But there you go. Other teams can move around, but not those two. Those two stick together. So Atlanta, the New York Islanders, New York Rangers, and Philadelphia in the Patrick division of the Campbell Conference. And now in the Smythe, we have Chicago, Kansas City, Minnesota, St. Louis, and Vancouver. Chicago, Kansas City, Minnesota, St. Louis, and Vancouver. So that's how things got split up. Both conference has 9 teams, 4 in one division, 5 in the other. And that's how things looked in 1974. Now we get 2 more teams, or 2 teams move. The Kansas City Scouts, 1976. The Kansas City Scouts moved to Denver as the Colorado Rockies. Again, not the baseball team. They didn't switch sports. The Kansas City Scouts moved to Denver. They're now the Colorado Rockies in 1976. And the California Golden Seals moved to Cleveland as the Cleveland Barons. So they didn't change the divisions. They stayed where they were at. But Kansas City is now Colorado and California is now Cleveland. 1978, the Cleveland Barons merged with the Minnesota North Stars. And they stayed as the Minnesota North Stars. So the Cleveland Barons merged with the North Stars, which gives the NHL 17 teams. They retained the name of the North Stars, but in the division, they stayed where Cleveland was. So the Minnesota was in the Smythe division, but the merged team is in the Adams division, since that's where California/Cleveland was. And so Smythe only has 4 teams now. So 17 teams. The Adams division has 5 teams and the other have 4. Okay. We get a new trophy in 1978, the Frank J. Selke Trophy, given to the best defensive forward by the Professional Hockey Writers Association in honor of Frank J. Selke, the general manager of Toronto and Montreal. I'm assuming not at the same time, but one never knows about this stuff. Okay, so 1972, the World Hockey Association was formed. 1979, the World Hockey Association folds. And when it folds, 4 teams are added to the NHL from the WHA, which are the Edmonton Oilers, the Hartford Whalers, Quebec Nordiques, and Winnipeg Jets. The Oilers and the Jets were both added to the Smythe division. Hartford went to the Norris and Quebec to the Adams. And they moved Washington to the Patrick division. So now you've got 3 divisions with 5 teams, and the Smythe has 6. 1980, the next year, the Atlanta Flames were sold and relocated to Calgary. So we now have the Calgary Flames. They stayed in the Patrick division. No changes there. In 1980, however, because of this new team in Calgary, 1981, the NHL decided that they needed to do something that was more geographically aligned. So, why not complicate things by changing the names of your divisions and the conferences? So, the Patrick and Norris switched conferences. They changed what teams were in them too, but so the Patrick is now the second division in the Prince of Wales, and Norris is now the first division, alphabetically anyway, and the Campbell. So Patrick and Norris switch conferences. So the three divisions with 5 teams in the Norris has 6. So lots of changes. Hartford and Montreal stay in the Prince of Wales Conference, but they move from Norris to Adams. Pittsburgh moves from Norris to Patrick to stay in the Prince of Wales Conference. Minnesota, Toronto moved from Adams to the Norris. So now they've switched conferences. Calgary stays in the Campbell Conference by moving from Patrick to Smythe. Chicago, St. Louis, and Winnipeg move from Smythe to Norris. And LA moves from Norris to Smythe. I hope you are all taking notes. All right, so it's supposed to be more geographically aligned. So the Prince of Wales Adams division has Boston, Buffalo, Hartford, Montreal, and Quebec. This means now the Patrick division in the Prince of Wales Conference, the New York Islanders, the New York Rangers, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Washington. Then in the Campbell Conference, we've got the Norris division with Chicago, Detroit, Minnesota, St. Louis, Toronto, and Winnipeg, with Smythe having Calgary, Colorado, Edmonton, LA, and Vancouver. Now, we've had a change in how we're structured, so we've got to change what we do with the Prince of Wales Trophy because we just can't leave it alone. So now, instead of being given to the regular season champion, the Prince of Wales Trophy is now given to the Prince of Wales Conference playoff champion for the 1981-82 season. The Clarence S. Campbell Bowl, similarly, is now the Campbell Conference playoff champion for the 81-82 season. We have a new trophy, the William M. Jennings Trophy. William M. Jennings was president of the New York Rangers. So the William M. Jennings Trophy. Now, previous to now, the Vezina Trophy was given to the goaltender with the lowest goals scored against. That is now the purview of the William M. Jennings Trophy, starting with the 81-82 season. So the goalkeeper, can be more than one. The goalkeepers have to play a minimum of 25 games, and it's for the team. The team with the fewest number of goals scored against, whatever goaltenders that they've got that played a minimum of 25 games, names will be on the trophy. So it could be 3. Could be more than 2. Could be just 1. George Quick. Jonathan Quick won it once. His name was only on it. Had a couple of backup goaltenders that played a number of games, but neither one of them played more than 25. So Quick's name was the only one on it. You can say maybe that's not fair. 25 games. Currently, I think they're playing 70 games right now. So you have to play at least half. 25 might be a little excessive, but that's what they do. Anyway, moving on. So that's what the Jennings Trophies is. The Jennings Trophy is now given for what the Vezina Trophy was given for. And so now the Vezina Trophy is being given to the best goaltender as determined by the club GMs. So the general managers will all decide who the best goaltender is and give the Vezina Trophy. So that is 1981. Divisions changed. They changed who's in what division. We've got the Jennings Trophy, and the Vezina Trophy changes. So 1981. Now we come to 1982. The Colorado Rockies sold, and they become the New Jersey Devils. Because of this, they move New Jersey from the Smythe division to the Patrick So that changes conferences. So they went from the Campbell to the Prince of Wales when they moved from Colorado to New Jersey. The Patrick now has 6 teams. And Winnipeg is moved from the Norris to the Smythe to even out those. I think if I remember right, they weren't happy about that. I don't know why. Don't particularly care, but I don't. But anyway, I guess they preferred playing who they were playing. But as it is, Winnipeg moved from the North to the Smythe, 1982. 1986, we get a new trophy, the President's Trophy. The introduction of the President's Trophy, the best overall regular season record. This year, it was the New York Rangers with 114 points. So that's the best overall season record as measured by the points given out by the NHL. 1986. 1988, we get another award, the King Clancy Trophy for leadership on and off the ice. And this is determined by the Professional Hockey Writers Association along with the NHL Broadcasters Association. Named after Francis M., nickname of King Clancy, Francis M. King Clancy, who was a player for Ottawa and Toronto. He was a ref, a coach, and a GM. So he did it all. I don't think he did all those at the same time. Boy, wouldn't that be great if you were a player and you were also the ref? I didn't do that. Hey, call a penalty on this guy. Hey, yeah. Anyway, 1988 with the King Clancy Trophy. We are now in 1991. We get our 22nd team, the San Jose Sharks, added to the Smythe division of the Campbell Conference. And then the next year, 1992, we get 2 more teams. We get the Ottawa Senators, who are added to the Adams, and the Tampa Bay Lightning to the Norris. And, of course, now that we've got 24 teams, we've got to change how we're doing things. No. I guess we're not changing anything here. I've got the listing of what teams are in what division. We'll skip it for now. And you raise your hand if you want me to go through what teams are in what division. But all right. Well, that ends the expansion era with 1992. And we come to 1993 to present, which is called the modern era. The modern era, whatever. 1993, we get 2 more teams. So we get the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim and the Florida Panthers. The Mighty Ducks of Anaheim are added to the Smythe division and the Florida Panthers to the Patrick division. Minnesota North Stars relocate to Dallas as the Dallas Stars, and they stay in the Norris. I say they stay in the Norris and add to Smith and Patrick. However, we're changing names again. So the names, Prince of Wales, Campbell, Adams, Patrick, Norris, Smythe, not necessarily, I suppose the name of the divisions really matters, but they decided to change the names to have geographical references. So they had changed everything to be more geographically relevant for the teams. Now they're just going to change the names, kind of move things around a little bit too. So now instead of Prince of Wales and Campbell, we've got the Eastern and Western Conference. And for divisions, we've got Atlantic and Northeast, and the Eastern, and Central and Pacific in the West. Pittsburgh moves from the Patrick division to the Adams, so from the Atlantic to the Northeast. Tampa Bay moves from the Norris to the Patrick, from the Central to the Atlantic. Central to Atlantic means they change conferences. Pittsburgh didn't change conferences, but Tampa Bay does. Winnipeg gets to move back to the Norris, which apparently they didn't like leaving from the Smythe, so they're moving to the Central from the Pacific. staying in the Western Conferences. And, of course, the trophies have to change. Not really changing. Prince of Wales Trophy's Eastern Conference playoff champion, Clarence Campbell Bowl, Western Conference playoff champion. Same thing, just with the names changed of the conferences, the designation of the trophy changes as well. 1994, 1995, the season was shortened to 48 games because of a contract dispute. 48 games from 84 because of contract dispute. There was an owner lockout. And apparently during this time, the Canadian dollar was so weak against the U.S. dollar that it was problematic for teams. So a number of Canadian teams started moving across the border. 1995, the Quebec Nordiques moved to Denver as the Colorado Avalanche. When they did that, they were moved from the Northeast to the Pacific Division, and which they changed conferences as well. So the Quebec Nordiques in 1995. 1996, the Winnipeg Jets moved to Phoenix as the Phoenix Coyotes. The league left them in the Central Division. In 1997, the Hartford Whalers moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, as the Carolina Hurricanes. They stayed in the Northeast Division. Carolina actually plays in Raleigh, not Greensboro anymore. Not sure when that changed, but not part of this documentary either. And then in 1998, the NHL expanded to 27 with our Nashville Predators. And that they were added to the Central Division. So 27 teams now. And 1998, 27 teams. So we obviously have to change the way we're doing things. So we still have the Eastern and Western Conference, but we have 3 divisions in each conference: Atlantic, Northeast, Southeast in Eastern, and Central, Northwest, and Pacific in the Western. Don't get too comfortable with this because those 2 new divisions are going to go away in 2013. I guess they lasted for 15 years. That's at least something. But yeah, so here we are, 1998, and we now have 3 divisions in each conference. When we do this, now we have to move everybody around again. So Florida, Tampa Bay, and Washington are moved from the Atlantic to the Southeast. Carolina moves from the Northeast to the Southeast. So there was nobody in the Southeast, so that fills out the Southeast Conference. Pittsburgh moves from the Northeast to the Atlantic. Toronto changes conferences, moving from Central to Northeast. Dallas and Phoenix move from the Central to the Pacific. And moving to the Northwest, the new division from the Pacific, Calgary, Colorado, Edmonton, and Vancouver. So the entire Northwest division was created from 4 teams that were in the Pacific. So that's why they moved 2 teams from Central to Pacific to round things out. So the Atlantic, we've got New Jersey, Islanders, Rangers, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. Northeast, Boston, Buffalo, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto. Southeast, Carolina, Florida, Tampa Bay, and Washington. That's the Eastern Conference. The Western Conference Central, Chicago, Detroit, Nashville, St. Louis. Northwest, Calgary, Colorado, Edmonton, Vancouver. And then Pacific, Dallas, Los Angeles, Anaheim, Phoenix, and San Jose. Listing these things out alphabetically, I see Anaheim, the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. So it gets alphabetized by the M, not the A. Anyway, so I didn't make a mistake in my alphabetizing, but I decided to call them Anaheim instead of Mighty. But anyway, there you go. And we get a new trophy. 1998, we get a new trophy, the NHL Foundation Award. given to someone who enriches lives in the community. It's very close to the King Clancy Trophy. It has not been given out since 2017. It was given out from 1998 to 2017. They don't list it as having been retired, but they haven't given it out in the last 6 seasons. Most likely not this year either. I don't know. Again, another place where I stopped doing my research because it was not relevant. If they don't want to give out an award, then don't give out an award. I don't care. And now we're up to 1999, where we get our 28th team, the Atlanta Thrashers, added to the Southeast Division of the Eastern Conference. The Atlanta Thrashers, 1999, also gives us a new award, the Maurice Richard Trophy, given to the regular season goal-scoring leader. Maurice Richard played for Montreal for 18 years, from 1942 to 1960. He was the first player to score 50 goals in 50 games. He did that in 1945. 50 goals in a season and 500 in a career in 1958. So Maurice Richard. His trophy is given to the regular season goal-scoring leader, 1999. Coming fast and quick here, 2000, the NHL expands to 30 teams, with the Minnesota Wild going to the Northwest Conference of the Western Division, and the Columbus Blue Jackets, the Central Division of the Western Conference. That is 2000. Now, the 2004-2005 season was canceled from a contract dispute, owner lockout. The 2006, the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim changed their name to the Anaheim Ducks. Name change. Did they retain? I think they did retain the records from when they were Mighty Ducks of Anaheim to Anaheim Ducks. So 2006, 2007, we get a new trophy, the Mark Messier NHL Leadership Award. Sure, you know who Mark Messier is. He was a player from 1979 to 2004. He played for Edmonton, the Rangers, Vancouver, and the Rangers. So Rangers twice with a stint in Vancouver. This is given to the player who exemplifies great leadership qualities to his team on and off the ice during the regular season. Do what you want in the playoffs and off season, but during the regular season, great leadership. Mark Messier gets to decide who gets this award. I believe there's fans and other people can suggest, and he listens to those suggestions and then gives the award. Really good player. So I haven't really looked at who got that one. But there you go. 2007, Mark Messier NHL Leadership Award. Now in 2009, the Phoenix Coyotes file for bankruptcy and the NHL takes over the team. So the Phoenix Coyotes, 2009 and 2010, we get a couple new awards. The Lester B. Pearson Award is renamed the Ted Lindsay Award. This is the award that goes to the most outstanding player. Ted Lindsay was a player for Detroit and Chicago and instrumental in forming the NHLPA. The NHLPA gives out that award. So the guy who founded instrumental in founding the NHLPA gets named. They take an existing award and rename it. And then there's also the GM of the Year Award that later gets renamed. But right now, in 2010, it's GM of the Year Award given to the top GM in the NHL, not anywhere, and determined by the media. So we've had the NHL Broadcasters Association, we got Professional Hockey Writers Association, and now we've got something called media. I don't know. Anyway, GM of the Year Award I think that's already been awarded this year. I think I saw something about that, but don't remember. That's 2010. 2011, the Atlanta Thrashers sold and they relocate to Winnipeg as the Winnipeg Jets. And they are staying in the Southeast Division of the Eastern Conference, the Winnipeg Jets. So this is another place where the Atlanta Thrashers were around for a certain amount of time. They got a certain number of awards, and Winnipeg Jets apparently don't claim them. What happened there? So anything that the Atlanta Thrashers did, I can't do much with, because I can't, when I'm doing the analysis, trying to figure out, who got what award and what did that mean. Any awards given to the Atlanta Thrashers just kind of sit there, because I don't know how to account for that. At least I hadn't figured that out yet. That's 2011. The 2012-2013 season was shortened from 48 games to 48 games from 82 games because of another contract dispute. Anytime there's a contract dispute, looks like they do an owner lockout right away. Kind of, there you go. In 2013, the NHL found a new owner for the Phoenix Coyotes, and so 2014, they are now the Arizona Coyotes, no longer the Phoenix Coyotes, the Arizona Coyotes, and they are no longer the Arizona Coyotes. They're the Salt Lake something or others. But okay, so now we've got the Arizona Coyotes. We're in 2013, and we have to change the divisions. Okay, so we didn't like having the Southeast and the Northwest divisions. We're going to get rid of those. All right, so we're going to get rid of those divisions. And we like the name Atlantic, but we didn't like who was in it, I guess. NHL, not me. I wasn't involved. So the Northeast Division gets renamed the Atlantic, and the Atlantic Division gets renamed the Metropolitan. So when I wrote it down correctly. Atlantic renamed Metropolitan, Northeast Atlantic, because if you say it the other way, it sounds like the Northeast becomes Metropolitan. But, so we got rid of two divisions, and we screwed with the names of the divisions in the Eastern Conference because we can, because that's not confusing at all. Not anymore, anyway. And then, so because of that, so moving from the Northwest to the Pacific, since there's no Northwest Conference, Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver, the other teams, Colorado and Minnesota, moved to Central. Dallas moves from the Pacific to the Central. Columbus moved from the Central to the Metropolitan, changing conferences. Detroit moves from the Central to the Atlantic, also changing conferences. Winnipeg moves from the Southeast to the Central, again, a conference change. And then since the Southeast goes away, the teams that move to the Atlantic are Florida and Tampa Bay, and from then going to the Metropolitan, Carolina and Washington. So we now have 16 teams in the East and 14 in the West. The Atlantic has Boston, Buffalo, Detroit, Florida, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, and Tampa Bay. The Metropolitan, not to be confused with the Seattle Metropolitans that won the Stanley Cup in 1917, but the Metropolitan Division in the Eastern Conference, Carolina, Columbus, New Jersey, New York Islanders, New York Rangers, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Washington. And then in the Western, the Central in the Western Conference, Chicago, Colorado, Dallas, Minnesota, Nashville, St. Louis, and Winnipeg. Pacific has Anaheim, Arizona, Calgary, Edmonton, LA, San Jose, and Vancouver. That's 2013 that change happened. So now we get to 2017, and the NHL expands again with the Vegas Golden Knights being added to the Pacific. The 2018, we get a new trophy, the Willie O. Ree Community Hero Award, given to an individual who, through the sport of hockey, has positively impacted his or her community, culture, or society. Looked at the list of people that have gotten this award. I don't know who they are. They are not people associated with the NHL, but it's an NHL award. It's determined by Willie O'Ree and the NHL. Willie O'Ree, who in 1958 became the first black player to compete in the NHL. He played for Boston for 1 year, got called up from wherever he was playing, played for Boston Bruins for 1 year in 1958, and then went back to the WHL. First black player in the NHL, Willie O'Ree, with the Willie O'Ree Community Hero Award in 2018. And then, of course, now, here we are, the COVID years. 2019, 2020, the season was shortened because of COVID-19. They didn't all play the same number of games, somewhere between 68 and 71, and then they picked 12 teams based on points, made the playoffs. They didn't change anything. It was just a notation of being a different type of year. 2020 being a COVID year, things did change because teams weren't. It was very hard across the border, so they created a division with all of the Canadian teams and 3 divisions in the U.S. In the West, we had Anaheim, Arizona, Colorado, L.A., Minnesota, San Jose, St. Louis, and Vegas. The Central was Carolina, Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, Detroit, Florida, Nashville, Tampa Bay. The North, being the Canadian teams, Calgary, Edmonton, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, and Winnipeg. And then the East, Boston, Buffalo, New Jersey, Islanders, Rangers, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Washington. And I remember that's when we moved here to Nashville during that year. And I remember talking to people about the Predators. The Predators didn't play well that year. Didn't have a very good season, and you could say a lot of things. Nashville did play in the Western Conference. The Western Conference being, at least years ago, more known for defense than offense. The Eastern Conference, the teams definitely score more. The Western Conference being heavier checking line, less scoring. So in this 2020, they had to play against Carolina, Columbus, Detroit, Florida, Tampa Bay, and teams that were, geared more towards scoring. And I think Nashville suffered because of that. Pekka Rinne I was familiar with, Tutu. Didn't follow Nashville a lot, but, they were probably built more around playing the teams that they had played previously, the St. Louis, Winnipeg, Minnesota, Dallas, Colorado, Chicago. They still got to play, Chicago and Dallas that were in the Central, but playing more of the Eastern Conference teams. I think their defense wasn't prepared to play that much of an offense. So that was kind of an interesting note. Everybody had to deal with whatever they had to deal with. And the other interesting thing, the travel for the North Division, Winnipeg to Ottawa, really, the traveling around for the Canadian teams had to make that season harder because some of the teams are closer than others, but you're at some point in time you're flying all the way across the country to play a game. And so I think it was harder on the Canadian teams because of the travel issues. If you remember, back when I was in grad school, I had a project trying to come up with a schedule for the for baseball's American League to try to minimize travel issues during the season. I think the previous year, the Mets were considered to be the best team, but their travel schedule was horrible, and so they suffered because of that. So they were investigating. I worked in the artificial intelligence branch of Georgia Tech research institute, and so I was working on that project. I didn't get very far, but and then it got canceled, but very interesting. And so I've always kind of kept an eye out for travel issues. And so I remember when they created this and I'm looking at where all these teams are at, it's like, wow, the travel today, not necessarily so hard as they were back in the 1980s, but still, it's a wear on you when you have to fly that much. It just makes recovery harder. Versus if you're playing, the Islanders, you get to drive home at night and, you're in your regular bed and your regular soigneurs or routines. It's easier to recover than when you're trying to do it on a plane. So, but anyway, that's 2020. We get a new trophy. We actually don't get a new trophy, but the GM of the Year award is renamed the Jim Gregory GM of the Year award. Still the top GM in the media, the top GM in the NHL, awarded by the media, Jim Gregory being a Toronto general manager and an NHL executive. And in 2021, the NHL expands 32 teams with the Seattle Kraken. And they are moved to the Pacific Division. So we found, when they did the last 2013 changes with the conference, 16 in the East, 14 in the West. We've now added 2 more teams to the West, so 32 teams, 16 in the East, 16 in the West, with the Seattle Kraken. And 2021, everything's back to that particular configuration. So 2 conferences, 2 divisions in each conference, and 8 teams in each division. So that's where we're at, and that 2021 hasn't changed to today. So that's kind of where we're at. That's the history of the trophies and the league. So when I was looking at when do I start my analysis, and it can't do it before 1967 because there were only 6 teams. And for, even though they added 6 teams in that season, 67, 68 season, it wouldn't be fair because the teams weren't necessarily as well-developed. The organization's not necessarily well-developed. So it's not really still a fair consideration, even though 1974, one of the expansion teams did win the Stanley Cup. So that would, 6 seasons later, they won. I think they won 2 out of 3 starting in 74. If you look at 1992, that's 25 years after expansion, which is the same length of time as the original 6. That seems a little bit excessive to wait that long, but that's kind of what I'm doing. With the 92-93 season, which is where I was looking at starting with the 91-92 season. The 92-93 season, there are gives me 30 seasons. I know 31 years, but the 2004-2005 season was canceled. So 30 seasons, so, math gets to be a little bit easier. And at that point, the league had 24 teams. It was the second season for San Jose and the first season for Ottawa and Tampa Bay. So, decent number of teams and a decent number of seasons to consider. And that's where I'm going to start doing my analysis and go from there. And, I can always go back and look further back, which, be interesting or not. It's hard to say. But that's kind of where we're at. The 30 seasons starting from the 92-93 season. And that's today where I am going to start doing my analysis. But anyway, so that's the history of the brief history of time of the NHL. Not fully inclusive, but hopefully enough. Coming up on 100 minutes, so an hour and 40 minutes. And I'm doing this to make it shorter. Oh my gosh, maybe I need to split this up. But anyway, there we are. There we are. Okay, well, thanks for listening. I'm Preston Proctor, and you've been listening to Predators Proclivity.